Hey, Robbie, how's it going?
Great, Matt. How are you?
Doing good, doing good.
Hey, for those of you listening in, thinking that you're going to get intro to hospitality, I'm going to do things a little bit differently this week when we talk about human resources. I'm going to have Dr. Mosley join us just to provide a counterpoint and a different perspective on things.
Thanks for having me.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Thanks for coming. Okay, so like I said, this week we're going to be talking about human resources and hospitality. And I say hospitality, a lot of this is very general and will work for any business situation, but there are going to be a few points that are going to be real specific to hospitality, and we'll get into those just as we come across them. Okay, so first we'll just give you a little idea about what human resources is about. Human resources is not just hiring employees. Now, that is a big part of what they do, but they're supposed to hire competent and qualified employees. They don't hire everybody. They should hire qualified employees. They should train those employees.
Now, sometimes it seems like they just hire anybody with a pulse, doesn't it?
It does. And, it's one of those things, as the economy goes in cycles, you see a lot of variation. Sometimes when unemployment is low, it becomes very difficult to hire employees, and you'll see it seems like they'll hire anyone. And then when unemployment is high, the HR gets to be a little bit picky. I remember in the late 1990s, I was living in Atlanta and driving past a Circle K convenience store, and they had a sign out front that said tuition reimbursement for new hires. Circle K was willing to pay your way to college if you would come work there because unemployment was so low at the time.
That's incredible. So once we finally find a competent person and, we have to train them, and how do we keep them motivated? I know we're going to try to go over this, but.
Motivation, there are lots of ways. And it's, so one, we motivate people with pay. Now, pay is not the ultimate motivator. A lot of people say, if I could just make a lot of money, I'd be happy. Actually, no, there's a point, like you have to make enough to feel that you're not being taken advantage of. And there is a pretty good correlation between pay and how satisfied someone is. But ultimately, it's not direct that you can't, if a job is soul destroying and awful, it really doesn't matter how much it pays. So pay is part of it, but it's also providing a good work environment, a fair place to work, a place where you feel appreciated. It's providing benefits.
Well, and that all seems to be part of the way that you retain your employees too.
It is. And it's also, another thing, that training of those employees, one of the things, that we find about it, people at work, is they want to feel like the work they do matters and that they're good at it. So like training your employees, giving them skills is an important part of making them satisfied with their job. And I'll admit, it's a catch-22, because when you give your employees new skills, that's going to make them more employable, and they may leave you and go somewhere else. But that's just that's part and parcel for running a business.
Yeah, that's just the way the world goes around.
Yeah. So, as we were talking about high unemployment, low employment, some of the things that you guys are going to face in your lifetime is, some demographic trends, changes in the type of people and the number of people that are available to work. And demographics really mean, anything about describing a population of people that you can put in numbers. So the first thing that I'll mention here, it kind of ties these top 3 points together, is just sort of the aging of the American workforce. The population on average is getting older, that there are not as many 17, 18-year-olds coming through the system as there are older people. And so as the population ages, it becomes, there are changes we have to make in hiring. People live longer now. So if you think about, say, Social Security, the original retirement age for Social Security was 60. Now, that was great when the average person lived at 55 and died. But now, some average person lives to be 78 years old, but they retire at 65. That's 13 years they may live, where, they may be fit and healthy. And so we have people working longer. The first thing about population, going back to the population change point, just the population over time changes. We have shifts in the types of workers we have. And then there are also, and I'm always very reticent to talk about this, but when we talk about generations, like Generation Y and millennials and all. And first of all, in the news, millennials, that term gets thrown around so much and used wrong. That's
well, I remember when it was Gen X was the slacker generation and everything else. And now we're on Gen Z, which most of our students are, which is
right.
Another thing that we need to be sitting there and watching, like everything that was normal for you growing up, a whole generation that is post 9/11.
Yeah, so the expectations are different.
Yeah, they don't understand waiting at the gate for somebody to land with your whole party waiting to surprise them.
Yeah, in an airport.
Yeah.
But but what I was getting at is I'm kind of reluctant to attribute a lot of behavioral differences to generations. That you always hear, well, Generation Y and millennials, they're entitled, or boomers are closed-minded. You hear these things about the generations. I'm always, every group thinks that the younger generation coming up behind them are terrible. It's just kind of, and every younger generation thinks the older ones don't understand. So I don't like to ascribe a lot of meaning to these labels, other than, there are some different expectations. At the age you're at as a Gen Z coming in, you're probably going to have 7 major career shifts in your lifetime. If you work, let's say you graduate and you're 22 years old and you work till you're 65, that's 43 years. That means every 6 years, you're going to have a major job change, a title change, or you're going to change where you work. Your generation generally does not have the expectation of employment for life. And as such, the amount of loyalty or what you're willing to how strongly your workplace fits into your identity is very different than an older generation. If you talk about the boomers, these were people who could expect to graduate from college, get a job, and work there for 40 years.
Yeah. My dad worked for Larson Storm Doors his entire adult life, pretty much.
Yeah. And so that's where the differences between generations come in. That for your, the younger generations, your expectations of loyalty from what you expect from an employer and what you're willing to give them an employer are different. And they're different for good reasons. Yeah. But just from an HR point of view, we have to keep that in mind when we're employing people. Another difference, more female employees. Where we're at now, there are more women in college than men. There are more women with higher education degrees than there are men. The shift towards women being dominant in management is on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, just even for our generation, when we went to grad school, there were more women getting their PhDs than men.
Oh,
at the time. So,
yeah. The workforce is shifting geographically. This has been going on for a long time, but people are moving away from the Northeast and the traditional population centers in the country and moving to sunny places, Southern California, Phoenix, Georgia, Florida, seeing increases in population. Places like Cleveland see decreases in population. On average, education levels are rising. People are going to school longer, more. And there's more diversity in the workplace, more people speaking different languages from different places, and this is just the reality of who our employees are going to be. If you think of, I don't know if you've ever been in the back of the house in a restaurant or a hotel, but I can guarantee it that knowing a second language would at least be handy, if not necessary.
Yeah, second, sometimes third. So.
Yeah. Okay. So turnover is when our employees leave us. And we have voluntary turnover and involuntary turnover. So voluntary turnover, someone quits. Involuntary turnover is you get fired. And the hotel or the hospitality industry has a well-deserved reputation for huge turnover. That our industry norm is around 200%, which means that we replace every position in the operation twice in a year.
Yeah. Now, why is that?
Well,
is it because there's opportunities for them to switch to, and sometimes to move up, you gotta move out?
There's a lot of, I'm going to talk about the negative ones first.
Oh, the negative. You're going to talk about the fun stuff first. Excellent.
Yeah. So, like here on the slide, it says inefficient hiring systems. One, we're hiring the wrong people. That's one of the things about the hospitality industry is, if you've never had a job before, you don't know anything about, or you're new to the country, well, you can become a housekeeper or a dishwasher. So we are the entry point for the labor force for much of America. And as such, sometimes we're not real picky about who we hire, and we get the wrong people. And so if you hire the wrong people, they don't last.
Well, like you pointed out, that's especially true for those harder jobs in our industry. Housekeeping is a back-breaking job, but it's so vital to the success of a hotel.
Well, that's true, because the guest, they don't see the engineer. They don't see the night auditor, probably. What they see is the result of whatever the housekeeper did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There is, for a lot of positions, limited opportunity for advancement. If you're working for a small business, it's an independent restaurant, well, there's a hard limit on how high you can go, because the owner is doing there's nowhere else to go. He's not going to leave and let you take over his position. And, in a lot of hospitality, there's kind of this view that there's limited advancement opportunities for a lot of positions. This is why you should continue to pick up skills and education so you can grow. But that's one of those perceptions of the industry.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why we do have the turnover rate. The qualified employees, if they're at a position long enough and they know that they are ready for that next step, they might have to leave. Now, they may come back to you. That's very common, where an employee loves where he's working, or she loves where she's working, will leave, get that promotion, get some more experience, and then when another job opens up back with you, if you've treated them well, they'll come back.
Yeah, you're perceived kind of by your role, and people are reluctant to promote you, and so you have to leave and come back often.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last reason I'm going to talk about that causes people to leave is it's bad management. It's lack of training and supervision. There is nothing worse in a job than not knowing what you're supposed to be doing, but being held responsible for something. Like, you're thrown into a situation you don't understand, it goes south, and then you get yelled at. And it's like, I was never trained on how to deal with this.
Well, and this can be also symptomatic of what we talked about earlier, where you're hiring sometimes the wrong people. And you may hire a manager who is qualified, but is not the right fit for your job. Or they may have the experience before, and some people are more reluctant to get rid of a bad manager than to promote a good employee.
Right.
And sometimes when you promote an employee, they're not a good manager.
That's true.
So, it's, lack of training and supervision, but it's also lack of training and supervision of the managers that goes into big effect here.
Yeah. And so, those are some of the factors that play into turnover in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
This slide, we're talking about, these are different laws that affect human resources and hospitality, or really anything in the United States. I'm going to let you read over these in more detail on your own. I'm not going to go into this I'm not going to go over this in detail. Just read over what each one of these kind of covers. And I'll just leave it at that. Read through it on your own.
Yeah, it's all important, but it's really, this class level is not suited for that. You'll go over a lot of those later on.
Yeah. When
Like
you when you take human
Dr. Hilliard's,
resources.
yeah, Dr. Hilliard's class, you'll definitely do a deep dive.
Yeah. So, what does a good human resources program do, or what do they need? One, they care about their employees. That is the human resources is kind of a weird position in an operation, because if you're doing it right, you are both, you're serving two masters, because you're supposed to be sort of an advocate for the employees, but you're also the face of the company to the employees. And so you're in that central position, where you are, you're really, you have two different, um,
Hats, so to speak.
yeah, you have two different hats that you're trying to wear. And so one of the good things, or the thing that a good human resources program should do, is you care about your employees. You're trying to do the thing that is best for them. A good human resources program defines the job. There is nothing worse than getting in trouble. Someone comes in and says, "Hey, why did you do that?" And you're like, "I did not know that I was supposed to."
Yeah, and this is also a little bit of a catch-22, that I've noticed, that sometimes you make the job descriptions so detailed, or you negotiate it, where you might get an employee who goes, "Well, that's not my job," right? So you want to define the job and let them know what they're expected of at a baseline almost, as well as some
Yeah, what are you going to be
tasks.
held accountable for,
Yeah.
and what are you not accountable for?
Yeah, nothing worse than being held accountable for something that you didn't know about.
Yeah, a good human resources program sets productivity standards. What do we expect from you from this job? How many people can you serve? How many rooms can you clean? That's the human resources program. We should recruit the most suitable candidates. So human resources is not just sitting there waiting for applicants to come to you. You're actually going out there trying to find the best applicants you can. And then amongst those, you pick the best. You don't take everyone. You find the ones that work best for your operation. If you look at really successful operations like Ritz-Carlton and Disney, it is not easy to get hired there. They spend a lot of time looking for the best candidates, seeking them out, and then they select. They don't take everyone. They only take the ones that they think most fit with their philosophy.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Then we do human resources is responsible for training and career development, helping people grow in their job, motivating employees,
Well,
offering benefit. Oh, Matt, you had something?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, with part of the suitable candidates is sometimes you'll hire a great employee and you'll put them in the wrong position and they will seem like a bad hire. It's really up to HR to recognize that maybe the strengths that that person has could be suited in a different position. You don't necessarily want to get rid of somebody that you've already taken the time to have them learn your culture and everything else, to just throw them away. HR needs to be able to recognize that an employee is still a good one. They're just not a good fit for that spot. And hopefully they got something else for them. Sorry, Robbie.
No, that's okay. HR, you need to offer competitive benefits, and it's up to HR to kind of figure out what those are. If you offer health insurance and retirement and paid vacation, well, maybe you can get away with offering a little bit less per hour or in salary.
Base salary,
yeah. And then HR is responsible for evaluating employees and determining how well they're doing their job and letting them know how well they're doing their job.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Oh wow, I didn't think about it that those points are now each going to get their own slide. So we'll go through.
Hey, how about that, right? But
yeah.
Each of those points are really valid and do need to be expounded upon. So, like, it's easy to say that you want to care about your employees, but it's really hard to actually show it and let them feel it, because we all get busy in our day-to-day grind that sometimes, you know, even HR might be like, oh crud, we need to pick like an employee of the month. It seems small, right? But getting that parking spot and that little bit of recognition really goes a long way.
Yeah, and in HR, if we're in the business of hospitality in general, but human resources, that just as much as we're supposed to be making guests feel welcome, human resources are supposed to make the employees feel appreciated. It's the same sort of idea. So as far as like defining the job, this is kind of like figuring out what it takes to do the job and who the right person is to do it. There are mental makeups, there are skill makeups, trying to figure out what this job entails so you can figure out who that person is going to be. And in hospitality, this gets a little bit complicated because it's hard to be standard. A chain restaurant here and a chain restaurant in another state may have wildly different ways of doing things. It's something as simple as who's responsible for mopping the lobby. There are a million jobs, and it's hard to analyze and standardize.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you brought up like night audit before. It's hard to tell if you hire the right person for that position, because if you've ever worked night audit in a hotel, you're pretty much by yourself the entire time.
And what are you responsible for as a night auditor?
Well, it used to be where you do all the end of day shift accounting and making sure that the hotel is just pretty much safe and your guests are safe. But now it's really, you click a few buttons and you just maintain a presence, so that way if a guest needs anything or there isn't a need to arises, you're there.
So yeah, but what if there's a fire?
There's a fire, it's your job to make sure that all the guests get out and they're safe and they're organized, and you can at your own safety first, obviously, but you try to evacuate the guests and make sure 911's on their way.
What if there's a drunk running up and down the hallways naked?
Now, that's not really a what if, it's when it happens. First, laugh a little bit because things do get ridiculous sometimes. But if there's a drunk that's running naked up and down the hallway, sometimes you have to assess things, right? And just be like, sir or ma'am, whatever the case is, try to get them back to their room. Hopefully they're not making noise.
But you have to understand who's responsible, whose job is it to deal with that?
Yeah. Oh, it gets interesting sometimes, You gotta know when to call the cops and when you can handle it and let the person have a little dignity.
So when we're trying to develop these ideas of what jobs, what a job entails, one of the things we will develop are what are called job lists. And we use these as training tools a lot of the time. But these are the tasks that a person has to do to perform a given job. So a job list, imagine if you're a new employee, it's great to be able to go and say, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. You're responsible for mopping the floor. You're responsible for wiping down the counters. You're responsible for greeting the guests. And that's what you're responsible for. And so, this is one of the first things that HR develops for a position. And it's a very useful tool because it removes that ambiguity. And that's the thing, that's the thing that makes people quit, is when they don't know what they're responsible for. So the job list is a good, tool to use to define these things.
Well, and it can also be used as like a checklist later that you can have posted up, because we all get a little bit complacent in our roles sometimes. And just to have that checklist where at the end of the day, you can be like, did I get everything done? I think so. And you're just like, oh crap, right? I didn't do that.
Yeah.
It's a good way to keep your employees from needing to be disciplined because they just, forgot something.
Yeah. And as we go into more, we have the job list and we have job breakdowns, which is it's a job list, but then we're going to break it down on how you do everything. So it's your responsibility to, mop the floor. Well, how do you do that? Well, you get a mop, you make sure that you lock the doors to the room so that no one can come in there and get injured. You put out a sign that says caution wet floor. You wait 30 minutes. You use these. So the job breakdown gives you step-by-step directions on how everything's supposed to be done. And maybe you put in some things like you can have safety tips in there, or you can have performance standards, like it should take you 20 minutes to do this, or how you're going to be evaluated on it.
Yeah. Now, when we're breaking it down, I like to call it breaking it down Barney style. That means to the most basic level, so anybody reading it will know and understand what you need to do. So
yeah, and it's really useful because you can go to an employee and say, "Hey, did you do X?" And they say, "Yes." It's like, so in doing that, you did all of these things? Well, no. Yeah. So you really didn't do it. Again, it makes it very clear about what the expectation is. And then we have job descriptions. And so a job description, and so we have job list, job breakdown, job description, this sounds
like a lot of work.
yeah. So this is the title that goes with the job. So this is what that position does. So a cook one, cook one, that's the title. And then the cook one reports to the chef. And then the cook one is going to be responsible for these 4 items. And a cook one should have a culinary degree. And a cook one should be able to lift 50 pounds. That's a job description. It's a name of the position, who they report to, what's going to be done, and what they need to be able, what sort of physical requirements go with the job.
Yeah.
Productivity standards, another thing that human resources develops. And this is describing how good an employee should be. So, I used to work as a line cook, and the expectation was that I should be able to prepare somewhere around 60 meals an hour. And that was the productivity standard. I needed to be able to prepare 60 meals an hour for 4 hours. So I needed to be able to crank out at least 240 meals during a meal period. That was the standard that had to be met. And if you could only do 30, you're not getting the job done.
Well, and it also gives you as a manager a benchmark where you can show your employee that they're not meeting the standards.
Right.
And you have to make sure that you enforce this almost universally. Obviously, when somebody's a new hire, you will have different benchmarks over a period of time that they should be reaching. Like by week 2, you should be able to hit this, these
right.
per hour. Just going straight out the back going, yeah, you need to hit the 60 that these people who've been doing it forever can do without blinking can be really demoralizing. So,
and how many rooms are you going to have as a housekeeper? How many rooms are you responsible for cleaning in a day? That's a productivity standard. Shifting gears here, human resources, so recruiting the right candidate. So, finding the person who's willing to, who meets, and it's not just the physical expectation, but, there's a lot of the person with the right attitude. Hospitality is different from a lot of other jobs. And, it's one of those, it tends to be good for people who are extroverted or people who enjoy, interacting with other people. And so personality, that personal makeup is a big part of selecting the right person.
Yeah. And, in the job description, if you have, needs to interact with guests and greet them and everything, you're going to want somebody who is very approachable over, say, me sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. But it's just one of those things that you're going to sit there and, it doesn't mean that if you are naturally an introvert that you won't thrive at these positions.
Right.
That is something that can be worked on. But as HR, you'll have to sit there and really kind of help those people along to flourish sometimes.
But, you have to hire the person, like for a hospitality job, you have to have someone who kind of has that service mindset.
Yeah,
I enjoy seeing people happy and helping make them happy.
exactly. If they don't thrive off of that, it's kind of tough sometimes.
Yeah. So where do we get our employees? Probably the best source, if you can, is internally. So, if we have a position, we post it. And if you can get an internal candidate, that's great. Internal candidates are fantastic because they're already familiar with your way of operation. You already know what their work ethic is like. You already know what their personality is like. It's not a guessing game. So hiring them internally through, your posting positions and any of a number of ways internally and making them open for employees, that's a great way to do it. And even if you don't hire an employee, maybe you hire someone they know. They say, hey, the place I work, we've got this position open. I know, and they bring in someone, because generally your employees, they only want to hire someone that they would vouch for. It's like, it makes them look good, and they don't want, they're gonna, if they like their job, they're not gonna recommend someone to you that would be bad at it.
Well, and
What do you think of that, Matt?
having an employees that get along is fantastic, because they're more likely going to stick around together, because going to work is not work as much.
Right.
One of my biggest factors for coming to the College of Coastal Georgia is that I already knew Dr. Robertson, and we have worked together at 3 colleges already, so I know what to expect.
And when the position came open, I was happy. I was willing to recommend Dr. Mosley. It's like, okay, we have this position.
Yeah.
This is a person I think could fill it.
Yeah. And the next point here is that though it says some businesses have rules prohibiting family members from working together, but sometimes a ban on that is unwise, and that's true. The thing you want to worry about is the view of being fair. If somebody has their kid working there, you don't want them to be directly in charge of that person, right?
Right. That's problematic.
Yeah. I've personally never enjoyed working with family, but it always seems to kind of go sideways. And when it does, it can really sour the mood of the whole organization. So it's a case by case type thing.
Well, you actually mentioned earlier today, you and I were talking about something else, a different case where you had a husband and wife work together, and it didn't seem to be a problem. Yeah. But there was a problem that developed, not because they didn't get along, but what happened?
So I was working at this place, and the husband was the maintenance engineer for the hotel, and the wife was the head housekeeper. Well, the husband had a heart attack and died on the hotel property, and she was there. And we were obviously respectful of her position, but when he died, we ended up losing 2 employees. And one of the problems that occurred is that the general manager was slow on acting on hiring a new maintenance person, and it really kind of spiraled from there, and held on to the head housekeeping position for like 3 months. Gave her some time, which is more than fair, but you need to make sure you have people in place to cover these things.
Yeah, you've still got to run a business.
Yeah. So, I mean, you need to have a heart, but it is a business, and you can't let your customers suffer because of it.
Right. Right. And so, hiring a family, there's upsides to it, and there are problems with it.
Yeah, up until then, it was perfect because they were both really happy being there. So it worked out great until it didn't.
Yeah. And my wife and I may have told the class this before, my wife and I met, we were both chef's apprentices at the same time, and started dating and got engaged. And we didn't actually tell anyone we worked with that we were even dating until we went in to ask for time off for our honeymoon.
Well, and that's usually kind of wise. There's a lot of sayings about why you don't date where you work.
Yeah.
And most of them are pretty true.
Yeah,
You know.
I violated that.
Yeah, Robbie got lucky. He's the exception, not the rule.
So if we can't find employees internally, then we go out and we go to what we think of as the more traditional external sources, advertising, internet, recruiters. There are a wide variety of places out there that we go to. Job fairs,
Yeah.
job fairs at colleges.
Well, exactly. I mean, if during your time here at CCGA, there's going to be people recruiting you the entire time. You just have to take that step. So I would implore you all to go through career services now and get your resume up to par, so that way when the career fair is coming around, it's very easy for you to get hired.
Yeah. A lot of companies employ headhunters, which are, these are going to be recruiters who basically go out there and try and find people who are qualified for jobs. And like we mentioned earlier, sometimes you kind of have to move laterally. Like if you're coming up in a hotel and you're you were hired as a front desk clerk and now you're the front desk manager and you want to become GM one day, it's possible that organization doesn't view you that way. So you're going to have to leave and go somewhere else to make that jump. And so headhunters, or executive recruiters are the people that are out there looking for people looking to make these moves and making those connections for people. I know that I have been hunted by a headhunter, pretty much every year I get a call from somebody, Dr. Mosley, same ways. They're always looking for people to fill positions. Yeah. And those are headhunters.
Well, and then, part of that is that you need to make sure that you don't burn any bridges. That's part of the next point here, networking, is the reason why they'll call you is because you've earned a reputation at some point. Now, they may cold call you the first time, but a professional headhunter is going to remember you if you got a good reputation, keeps building when they find someplace new for you. So.
Yeah, and as far as networking goes, I've been teaching since 2001. And I can tell you that in the year 2020, I have been contacted by 3 different students that I had in the year 2001 about either as a reference or helping them get a job, or I get contacted constantly by former students looking to hire people. And so those connections, that network, that's the first choice on how you try and hire people, really.
Yeah. And right now it's probably more important than anything that you network with all your classmates, get to know them, because sooner or later that person is either going to own a place, run a place, or know somebody who is where you want to go. It is a small world. I was in Iwakuni, Japan, and my company sergeant major was from a town 2 towns over in South Dakota from where I grew up. It's a smaller world than you think. Just try not to burn bridges along the way. All right.
Yeah. And it may sound strange, but I can tell you that person that's sitting at the desk in front of you, 20 years from now, you're going to call them trying to find an employee.
Yeah, typically.
Yeah. So, how do we select our applicants? There's a lot of processes we go through. And, so one, receiving and processing applications. I'll tell you a story that's kind of embarrassing. Your job application, that is the first thing your potential employer sees about you. And so when you fill it out, you want to be very careful about it. I actually applied for a job many years ago, one of the first academic jobs I applied for, and I didn't get it, even though I was a good candidate. And my advisor called and asked, "Hey, what happened? Why did you get kicked out of the pool?" And it was because my formatting on my resume changed halfway through. Now, it was a very long academic resume, but literally I had changed fonts and hadn't noticed it. And they kicked me out of the application.
There's always going to be one person who's going to notice the flaw. And that's why using people like Brian Weiss is important. I had Robbie, I had so many people look at my resume before I finally turned it in. And I'm sure there's still mistakes that somebody will find.
Yeah.
I've always find that selecting a job applicant is a lot like, performing voodoo, you're going to have your own special ritual and things that you're looking for.
But, I'm looking for someone that answers the questions. I'm
Yeah.
looking for someone that follows directions.
Yeah. If they're filling out the application and it's just generic, that they don't really care.
Yeah.
Typically.
The next step, we interview. After the interviews, we sit down, we evaluate, okay, we've got 3 good candidates. Let's talk about which one we like. We check. Here's something you should do. You check references. And this is a little problematic because people are afraid of getting sued. But, one question you can always ask that is passable is, would you rehire this person?
Yeah. That one's huge. And that's one that you can answer honestly. And sometimes it's not in what they say either. It's in how they say it. Like, it's a lot different than, I would definitely hire him again. I wish they would apply back here. Right.
Well, you want to check references because it's easy to lie on an application.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's easy to fudge that, even though it's starting to get a little bit harder.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, can you prove that somebody didn't know someone? I mean, you can now check up on their degree and a lot of things, but you want to,
exactly.
And then the last thing is we go through the hiring process.
With checking references, if you know the place that they worked at before, it's a small world. You might know one of the other people that works there that they didn't put down as a reference. If you're hiring somebody and you know somebody that you trust at that place, call that person too.
Yeah. So another thing human resources does is they're responsible for training. And training, I can't overstate how important training is, because it is your employees will be better. They will be happier and more productive if they understand what they're expected to do. So good training in hospitality, we're not good at it. We do not have a good track record of training. We depend.
So you're saying sitting in front of a TV watching videos for a day was not quality training?
I would be willing to bet not. And if you got to sit in front of a TV, that's probably better than most people get, because usually we depend on the magic apron. It's like, here's your apron, here's your mop, go mop.
Yeah.
That's the magic apron will teach you how to do it. And so the steps we go through, we figure out what our policy is going to be, who's going to do the training, how it's going to be done, define the training needs. What do people need to know how to do? Good training, you plan it out. You tell your employees, you conduct it. Then you go back and you evaluate. Did the person learn what they needed to learn? Yeah. And then it's just kind of an ongoing process.
A lot of times it's not, as Robbie mentioned, it's the magic apron. You never really evaluate what you could have done better to make it better. Or you just put them with the closest employee who may not be the best one to train a new employee.
Yeah, I can tell you, if you put them with a more senior employee and say, just follow him and watch what he does, you know what they're being trained to do? They're being trained to do what they do. So if that person cuts corners, they're going to cut corners. Yeah. If that person has a bad attitude, your new employee is going to have a bad attitude. Yeah. It just kind of goes together. Yeah. Well, we've already talked about the value of training, but training for consistency, like I just said, if we don't train, you can't expect what you do not inspect. So like, I can't expect my employees to be able to do something if I don't teach them how to do it.
Yeah. And it really, it's when you just cut corners on training is when you're going to kind of piss away all that work you did to get the person to start there. You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Sorry. I thought there's a tornado watch going on right now.
Yeah, and it's pouring down here, so I'm thinking we need to hurry.
So, if you put all the effort into getting the person to come there and you just kind of go shoddy on the training, it's going to be kind of a waste of your money. Sorry. But yeah.
All right. Let's see. Oh, orientation. So, think about when you've had a job and you go in that first day and you don't know what's going on. Orientation is one of those things that is really necessary for an employee to be effective. So first of all, it creates, your first impression. Like, this is the place I'm going to be working at. Do they take the time to kind of nurture me and bring me along, or do they just throw me into it? And employees want to do a good job, but they have a lot of questions. There's a lot of uncertainty when you start a new job. So like, I want to be a good employee, but I also want to know, what day do I get paid and when do I get to get lunch? And orientation should address these things, and it should kind of bring an employee into the culture and tell them what's important.
Well, and it's also important to note that, yeah, they're going to have a lot of questions, but they may be too timid on their first day to ask those questions.
Right.
So you understanding and trying to, do a little feedback exercise afterwards.
Yeah, they want to make a good impression because they've been told their whole life, well, don't ask about money on the first day. So they're not going to ask. But the reality is, they want to know when they're going to get paid.
Yeah. Rent.
I'll tell you, I worked in Phoenix, Arizona at a resort out there. I drove, my wife and I drove from St. Simon's Island to Phoenix, Arizona to start a job. We go in, we've been told, hey, we're going to, they have employee housing. They're going to set up in housing, and then we're going to meet with the chef. We get there on location. I am like dressed up to meet my new boss, khakis, button down shirt. I walk in, and the very first thing I get, I go in the lobby. The sous chef comes up and said, "We're shorthanded. We need you in the kitchen now." And that was my orientation.
Hey,
I can tell you, it never got better.
No, that's not a good first sign.
Yeah. So motivating employees, things, what managers do to motivate employees.
So you need to put the fear into them, right?
Yeah.
No.
First off, if you want your employees to do something, anything better, anything different, you have to, let them know that everyone has to practice. Nobody comes in as automatically fantastic at something. There's a learning curve. There's like rising to that point. So you have to remove that fear of failure. You have to say, hey, do your best and I will back you up.
Yeah.
And then I will train you on the areas you're short in.
And that's important, is if you notice that somebody's having trouble in something, take the time. And, sometimes it's hard to take that time, but really emphasize that they need to work on that,
Yeah. Other things that's important, pay a fair wage. You can have a great workplace, and if you're not paying someone a living wage, if you're not paying them what they're worth or what they can earn somewhere else, you're not going to get good employees. You're not going to have motivated employees. Mm-hmm. Offer incentives and rewards for performance. So, if you do a good job, you get this in return. You get a special parking place, or you get recognition, or you get a paid vacation, or you get more time, whatever it is, but give recognition.
Yeah.
And the last thing on here, transparency. There's nothing worse to an employee than a closed door. Like, if you have to knock on the door to talk to your manager, there is a mental hurdle you have to get over. Like, the manager shut the door. They're telling you, I don't want to be bothered.
Well, and there's also the literal closed door that he's talking about, but also being approachable to your employees. Right. And when you go through, I mean, I used to make a point to say hi to every single person and remember details about them. So if their parents having surgery that day, to just be like, hey, did you hear any news? Because you're going to understand that they're going to be a little distracted, things like that.
Yeah. The broadbanding, this has to do with pay. And this is one of those things that helps with motivation. But basically, it's the idea, not everyone gets paid the same amount. For a given position, you kind of have the low range and then you have the high range. And so, maybe you have a new employee that's not real good. They're going to be on the low range, but you have a senior employee who for whatever reason doesn't want to move out of this job, but they can continue to grow. They can continue to earn a wage that is, reflects their abilities. So broadbanding is that we don't have a narrow range, we don't have a single defined pay scale. We have a range of pays that are available for a position depending on how well they do it.
Well, and this is important, this second one, that sometimes an employee doesn't want to get promoted.
Right.
Right. And it doesn't matter if it makes sense to you. If the employee is happy and you want to keep them there, you may end up paying them a little bit more, but sometimes a great employee is a horrible manager. So,
or, one of the most important people in a restaurant is the dishwasher. And having a dishwasher that's been there for 15 years, he's worth more.
Oh, it's fantastic. We had 2 great dishwashers in one of my early jobs, and they were just there until they were done working. And
yeah, and just because they're a dishwasher, they're worth more than just someone off the street.
And I will tell you this: nobody disrespected those 2, because you keep them happy as long as you can. And it was yeah. Y'all find out.
Let's see. Exit interviews.
Yeah, so every time they leave work for the day, you got to interview them. Is that what it is? No?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No, when people do leave a job, we should conduct exit interviews. Why is someone leaving? There's a lot of information that you can gather about how the place is run, why there's turnover, things like that. Because once someone has a new job and they're leaving you on that last day, they're willing to be honest.
Well, and you're right. Sometimes I've always found that talking to them a month or 2 down the road to see how things are turning out and what they thought about this job now that they've been somewhere else, or to give suggestions, has been pretty helpful too.
Yeah, it helps you manage better.
Yeah, sometimes on the day that they're leaving, they might be a little bit emotional. They might, emotional is sometimes a negative word, but they might be like, all right, F this place, right?
Yeah. Screw you losers, I'm out of here.
Right, and you can't really hold that against somebody who was a good employee, And that's part of the burning bridges, is sometimes knowing when to just kind of let a transgression slide. But exit interviews can be entertaining.
And really, the last thing that one of the last things that human resources does is evaluating employees. You need to be able to assess how well someone's performing their job, and provide them feedback. And one of the things that's important to recognize is that if the job isn't being done right, it may not be a problem with the person, it may be a problem with your system. And so a good evaluation program helps you identify that.
Well, in the evaluating, when you're giving any kind of critique, and this goes for almost anything, I always tell people, if you're going to leave bad feedback, give very specific things, but also, make it constructive. Yeah, constructive. Thank you. Just telling somebody like, oh, you do this really poorly, or, you gotta sit there and evaluate the person as well as their performance sometimes. Now, somebody might not be living up to your standards, but knowing the person and seeing that they've improved constantly, you're going to emphasize that, oh, you're doing such a great job on improving, you're almost there, instead of giving them the negative feedback as much.
So that here on this slide, it says, a good review should be specific and objective. Give specifics, and you don't emotionally get involved. You're doing it dispassionately.
Yeah.
All right, that's it for human resources.
How about that? Is almost as pain-free as seeing your HR manager. Sorry.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Mosley, for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson.
And if you guys have any questions at all, I'll be in the chat during class time, and feel free to email me.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.